I showed this picture at the Institute of Medicine Autism and Environment meeting a couple of years ago, and some people said to me that this was the most graphic thing. People who had really were in this but didn't really know, had never had experiences with people with autism. It's a way of making a point rather quickly. There's also a lot of immune features in autism: infections, autoantibodies, antibodies against your own tissue, particularly more so in the family members on the mother's side. Food allergies, cytokine and chemokine problems, abnormal immunoglobulins, and some of those levels are associated with behavior issues. The worse they get. Energy metabolism. Yeah.
I just have a question. That last slide with the toe, what was that?
Oh, that's just fungus. And these are pictures illustrating the condition, but they're not necessarily, that's what it looks like in anybody who has it. It's a fungal infection of the toe.
Thank you.
Eczema is very common. And a lot of people report that eczema goes away when they change diet to an elimination diet such as specific carbohydrate diet. And that's just really interesting. Energy metabolism. We could not make it without our mitochondria. These little subcellular little things, and they turn glucose and things into energy. And they are exquisitely environmentally vulnerable. Their function, various steps in their pathways can be hit by hundreds of drugs, thousands of chemicals. For some reason, it's very hard for many of my colleagues to think about mitochondria except in terms of genetics. Even when there's tens of thousands of papers, at the least, I haven't counted them, on mitochondria and mitochondrial injury. Mitochondria are very important in a lot of things that are important in autism. They include gut motility and neuronal functioning of cells in the brain communicating with each other, and the synapse, the connection of one nerve cell to another, needs a lot of mitochondrial energy to work properly. So if your mitochondria have taken any kind of a hit, even if they're still working but they're a little sluggish, which is, I think, a lot of what the problem, we're not seeing cell death in autism, we're seeing cells, if you look at the brain scans and the microscopic pictures, it's not really a picture of a major drop-off in cell number. It's much more subtle than that. And my sense is really it's about function and not about real permanent damage. Glutathione is an extremely important, it's the most powerful antioxidant that protects you from oxidative stress, and it's the most powerful detox chemical in your body. And in autism, it's been measured. There's two states it can be reduced, whereas when it can do its job and oxidize, when it's taken out because it did its job and hasn't been replenished to be reduced again. And in autism, there are a number of studies showing there's not enough reduced or too much oxidants. This is a picture somebody sent me from the Pentagon, and apparently the Pentagon was developing a glutathione patch for when they sent soldiers out into high-intensity warfare with infectious and chemical exposures. They would try and protect the soldiers with glutathione. And so it's not just a bunch of health nuts who are thinking about glutathione. What we're talking about in terms of what chemicals do is, and whatever is going on, chemicals, infection, other stressors, is injury at the cellular level. And this is a picture from Jill James's work. She's a very important figure in the oxidative stress research area, showing that you can get damage to cellular proteins, damage to cellular membranes and subcellular membranes, damage to DNA. The oxidative stress changes the way the lipids work in the membranes. The membranes get stiffer. They don't, the channels that go through the membrane and can help communication, they don't work so well. Cells have stuff coming in and out of them that they shouldn't. Calcium, which is very excitatory, makes your cells more irritable, gets in and the balance gets off. So all of these things, at the very cellular level, you start eroding the capacity to take care of yourself as a cell. And when your individual cells can't do that, the things that they do as groups and organs don't work so well, and it's kind of an erosion. And it can get worse, and as it gets worse, a lot of functions can go awry. And I think that this is not the way people have been thinking about autism, but I think it's the way people should be thinking about autism. And when you do that, it gives you a whole lot more to look at that you can actually do something about. Now, more than brain circuits, brain tissue. So I just finished telling you that there are changes in cells that we have a fair amount of documentation on, and could be getting a lot more if we were devoted to looking for it. And now I'm going to tell you about some of what we know about and how that's going on in the brain. One of the single most replicated findings in autism is that the brain, on average, and not for everybody, but on average is larger in autism than in typicals. And this actual enlargement takes place after birth, in the first couple of years. So in this picture, the red is autism and the black is typical. You see sometime around 9 months, based on head circumference. So we're not doing this because we know a child is autistic. We're doing this, we find out a child is autistic, we go back and get the head circumference measures that were done along the way. And this was a study where they actually knew they were studying children at risk. So in the first 2 years, the head starts getting bigger. And it's a very rapid increase the first 2 years, and then the rate of growth slows off a lot. What is making the brain bigger? That's a really interesting question. First of all, you should know that having a big brain, most people with big brains don't have autism. So it's not if you have a big brain you have autism, and if you don't, you're not. It's just something which, there's something going on which is making people have bigger brains, sometimes bigger foreheads. Have some of you noticed that some kids with autism have very big, prominent foreheads? Well, I'll get to that in a minute. What I did in my brain imaging research is looked at, divided up, so this is a slice of a brain from a brain scan, and if you sort of took it going down like this, you see the left side and the right side, and the nose would be out here, and the academic would be there, and on the outer part is the gray matter, that's where the nerve cells live, and then there's the blue part there, which is not blue, but it's color blue, other nerve cells, and then in the middle, the yellow and white is where these wires go through, the axons, because the nerve cells send processes that travel some distance, like phone wires, and they're wrapped with insulation, and the insulation has fatty material, and it's called myelin, and that stuff's white, so it's called the white matter. So we divided up the brain into gray matter and white matter in deep gray regions to see what areas had different sizes than other areas. We thought we were looking for the part of the brain that would explain the autism, and we didn't find it. But what we did find was that the white matter was a lot bigger. It was bigger, even if it wasn't only bigger because the whole thing was bigger, it was more bigger than that. It was disproportionately enlarged. And then we went back and said, is it the whole white matter or is it only part? And what we found was that only the part that was colored yellow on the outer part, right under the gray matter at the outside of the brain. And this is very interesting. Well, the reason it's interesting is that that part of the brain develops the white matter insulation quite a time after birth, between the end of the first year after birth and the beginning of the second year, which by some curious and suggestive coincidence is when the brain is getting bigger. So is there something going on in that part of the brain that's making the brain get bigger, and if so, what would it be? We don't know what this is yet, but I will show you something which I find really intriguing and suggestive, and is my working hypothesis and what I'm designing my research studies to test.